So Adam, you mentioned the two sides of the fence, and I do really like this analogy. I love when I love a binary, right? That's nice and clear, nice and clean. What are your thoughts on kind of moving from one side of the fence to the other side of the fence? Like how do you get there? What are the ingredients that define that good side of the fence?
Well, I think for moving from the bad side of the fence to the good side of the fence, the good side of the fence requires like sort of defining the constraints, because on the good side of the fence, it's clear like what you need to do, the resources you have available to do that, and an order, an order of which to do that. But as you move to the other side of the fence, or for the other side of the spectrum, you deal with resourcing constraints. Like, hey, we have 50 or 100 things to do, and I have too few people to do them, or there's too many projects going on. There's just too much of too many different things. It's the only way to like tackle that problem is you have to whittle the problem space down. And there's like this few sort of like forcing functions you can take. It's like, okay, well, how many people do I actually have? Or, how many projects can I, like really handle? Or what are sort of the leadership principles or the higher level like business goals that we can align some of these priorities around? Like if your business is like struggling to make revenue, well, then maybe you need to do things that are related to revenue. It's not going to matter if you don't have the revenue, if you don't do anything else. And those are just ways that you can start to say no to things, so then you have less stuff to worry about, right? It's kind of like, what I think about it is like, what are the ways that can sort of like bucket things that I can easily reject quickly without having to give it too much thought, so that other things that require more like attention and focus, like have that, right? It's like you have to clear off your desk, so to speak, before, to find the things that you need to look at. Like I think of that, like in the situation where there's usually like too many competing priorities, it's because there's no clear purpose of what you should be doing. And it's that way it's really easy for things to sort of like come in and like take over, what's happening.
I think the word purpose is actually critical, right? Because we prioritize things that are important, right? You give me 10 things to do, I'll pick the 3 that I think are the most important. And we also tend to prioritize things that are going to impact us sooner, right? So I'll use climate change as an example, right? Science has been talking about climate change for decades. In fact, I saw an article that was written in like 1908 or something, where they were talking about like the impact of pollution and things like that. But the reality is, the world is literally burning around us, like literally burning. And our countries even now significantly changing, right? Because what are their real priorities, right? So I think you have to really understand what the purpose of something is and what your purpose is, both as an individual, as a team, but also as a company, and then work consciously towards that purpose. And I think if you can do that, then the priorities become much clearer and much easier, and you can not do a bunch of stuff because it's not part of your purpose.
Yeah, there's a few things that are kind of popping into my mind as you two say those things about the example of climate change and the example of what drives priority. And clarity is so important. It's there's a lot of us think that we get clarity once we've prioritized, but we need clarity in order to prioritize. And I think that's a missing piece very often, is that teams are just kind of pointed at a bucket of things and say, like, prioritize and make sure that you're working on the most important thing. But that takes alignment, it takes empathy, it takes the ability to kind of step out of your own incentives, right? Because you've got something that you could prioritize individually, but it might not be the most important thing to the organization or the customer or the planet, right? All of these things have to be kind of balanced. And so in order to get that clarity, and alignment, I think it's very valuable. I was thinking about, as you were saying, Adam, the things that you can just like throw away and just discard. That made me think of like decision filters, right? Where we can define these systems inside of an organization and agree that we always prioritize X over Y, right? So simplify and clarify that entire equation so that you can just discard a bunch of things. And the more that you can just discard, and you shrink that all possible options down to maybe you have 10, and then you have other tools available, hopefully things like values, things like principles, things like precedent, right? If you've done things like recorded architectural decisions and you have architectural decision records, then you could say, well, historically this is what we choose. We value speed over stability. Maybe we value speed over stability in this specific case, and it matches up with our situation right now. So this is an easy decision to prioritize. But then, of course, we also have like things like matrices, right? Like rice and impact versus effort that can help us kind of like plot things. And I find that very valuable, right? Like I'm a visual person. So for me, like I like to put everything out on a surface and move it around and see, okay, well, if we do this, it means we don't do that. Like how do we feel about all the things that we're not able to do if we prioritize this one thing? And so counterfactuals are another like valuable tool as well.
Yeah. So here's the thing. I think in most companies, and I'll use just only companies, a lot of these things are talked about, and they might even have plans for these things, but in the day-to-day operation, most of these things go out of the window, in the sense that the longer term goal or the longer term objective in a strategy or priorities that are assigned to that will get overridden by the shorter term problems or the fires or the other things, and those things aren't dealt with in a systemic way so that they don't keep interrupting the process, right? So we want to go achieve this goal, and like there's great examples of where those things were done well, right? So as an example, a class example is the US space program to get to the moon. Like within this decade we will set foot on the moon, and when you think about what that really was asking people to do, it was insane. Like the amount of technological change and development and innovation using the technology of the time. But what happened was there was purpose, right? And so I'm coming back to that purpose. And there was alignment, and there was all these other things that you mentioned as well that brought people together. And there's the famous story of Apollo 13 and how they had to, jig up a air scrubber or whatever it was. Like they all had purpose. They were clear in what they were trying to do, and they weren't letting other parties come like, hey, while we're going to the moon, maybe we should figure out how to go to Venus or something. So I think that kind of thinking and that kind of mindset needs to be brought in, and then it needs to be instilled in the culture, like all the way down. So it's not just a case of the CEO making declarations and okay, bye. It's the CEO makes declarations, sure, but then it's actually instilled down through the company. So the people at the bottom, for lack of a better term, know exactly why they're coming into work every day, what they're doing, why they're making decisions, etc. So I won't sort of repeat that too much, but I do think clarity and purpose and just a real vision of what you're trying to achieve and then aligning on those are the reasons or the ways you can address these priorities.
So at the risk of perhaps like jumping in at the wrong place, but you mentioned culture, Saeed, and I was recently reading that it was just published, I think recently, Working Backwards, book about Amazon, and there's they talk about the leadership principles, but like one thing that stuck with me about culture and the decision filters was the tenants. Like one example was if there is something, if we have to make a decision that is easy for us to do or better for the customer, we'll choose the one that's better for the customer. So that's the example of a decision filter that's been baked into culture. And they use that like as a lever in their whole process to make it easier to make decisions, right?
Yeah.
At that point, there's no need to prioritize. It's already been done. You just make a decision and
Right.
move on with your life.
I love that. Those are great examples. I love the space mission because there's no arguing with the clarity of that, right? We will land a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth. That's it, right? You really only need that to get started and to make a lot of decisions. Probably every decision is like, does it contribute to the outcome that we're looking for or not? And if not, it's easy to discard that. And it's easy for people to talk about, and you don't have this kind of splintering of where's the room for interpretation, right? For someone to be like, well, this is going to benefit my career a little bit, so I'm going to like steer it a little bit in this direction. It's no, it's very clear. It's not open to interpretation. It means you can sort of use it as this guide or a filter. And I love that. I keep coming back to filters all the time. I just think it's so powerful as a way of kind of discarding things that aren't valuable, aren't gonna contribute to the outcome. Saeed, any closing thoughts?
No, I think the last thing I'd say is prioritization is a real skill. I think it's a real skill that people need to practice, and they need to think about, and they need to work on. And I think understanding scope and things like that are part of it. But I think you get better over time. And I'll just leave it at that. Like, it's hard, but it's doable for people if they're focused on it.
Perfect. Adam, any last thoughts?
The most important part about prioritizing is learning to say no.
Right, exactly. Practicing saying no, I think is super valuable from a personal perspective all the way up to the top of the company. The last thing that I thought of was this idea of time horizon, right? Because time and the space mission was a great example of this too. There was a very clear within this decade deadline, which meant that you could make all these decisions knowing that is your deadline, that is the time scope that we're thinking of. And I think we get frustrated about people who have a 4-year time horizon in politics. We have who knows how long as humanity, and everything in between, right? I think it's very important to kind of be on the same page about what is the time horizon we're talking about here, because that has everything to do with priority as well, timeliness. But with that, we are out of time, and I'm sure we'll be back to this one. This is a great topic. Really appreciate you folks jumping into this. So see you next time.